was in another large city in the state of California. I was in Los Angeles, and I got a phone call one day from a FBI man, from an FBI officer, and agent, and he said to me, he said, "We have been watching and listening to you from day one." And and he says, "But we have no problem with what you do at this point. You are not considered," and I'm trying to remember how he said this. He said, "At this point, you are not considered to be a threat to the authorities. But if that day comes, you will be dealt with accordingly." I said, "Yes, I understand that." And so he said to me, when you speak harshly of government and banking, which I do, he said, and this is an FBI agent, he said, when you speak harshly in public of government, a certain amount of that is allowable. They don't mind. They're not offended. They're not going to affect anything. They're not going to believe anyway. And besides, what are they going to do if they did believe it? Right? And he said, but, and this was his words, and I remember him well, because I was really rather scared when he called, because I was not expecting to be talking to an FBI agent. He said, when you, and I take an oath that this was the words that he said, when you speak of the church, what you're talking about is organized crime at the highest level in our country. You're talking about money, political power. So, he says, so as long as you are perceived to be an individual on a soapbox, no one is going to be concerned about you. No one is threatened. But if you begin to be heard, not listened to, but heard, and if that becomes the case that you are becoming known and being heard, then you will be dealt with accordingly. So I want you to know that we in the FBI do not consider you to be a threat. But just know there will come a day if you do succeed in what you're doing. So that was, I already had formulated my own thoughts about, quote, the church, end quote. But at that point, that was startling to hear someone say that. This is not to cast dispersion on the Christian theology. No, as a matter of fact, if you wanted to get serious about Christianity, then I would suggest you start right here with Coptic Christianity, because that's where it all began. And if you really want to get serious about the faith. So I have no problem with the faith. I have a problem with what has become known as the military-industrial complex of business in America. I believe that somewhere along the line we're going to have to begin to look at all of those institutions that are running the world and the people behind the scenes who own them. I have a very big and a very strong spiritual place in my life for the divine. I have no time for religion, government, big business, etc. But having said all of that, I think the way that I would conclude, again, is that I do not consider myself to be an authority, because I have found that the more that I learn, the more I don't know. And the more it becomes apparent to me that I am merely, like everyone else, on a journey. And from the time that I began this, my quest, my spiritual quest, many, many years ago. And as I said, I've had many experiences that have caused me to be and think the way I do. I have for many, many years been on this quest. 1959 is when I began. So I've been doing this kind of thing for 40 years, but it's only the last 12 years that I've gone public with what I believe is the work that I've been given to do. And I'll clarify that for you. My work, I believe, is not to present an intelligent, detailed presentation, but it is quite simply to confront the organized world and say you're wrong. There are things which you don't know or which you do know that you have concealed, and we need to start thinking in a whole new way about who we are and where we're going. And so I put myself out on the line to do nothing but just that, just calling people's attention to the fact that we do not know everything and that we had better start showing respect for the Spirit and for wisdom. And that wisdom is encoded and being held by priests and the holy men, of which we are privileged to have one among us. And again, I want to thank you for your time and for hearing me. And I think that's it. And if you do have any questions, I'll try and answer them. I have. Yes, sir. Oh, yeah.
You never said what the black represents.
Oh, no. Devil is, no, the word devil is simply putting a D in front of the word evil. It becomes devil. God is simply taking an O out of good and it becomes God. You know, God is good and devil is evil. Actually, God, the word God comes from a German Gothic, the German word Goth, G-O-T-H, Gad, Goth, gives us the word God, and devil is nothing more, as I said, than the personification of evil. So I do not believe in God in the classic sense of the term or devil in the way it is understood. I do believe that there is a very powerful spirit or a force let loose in the nature of things which has evil as its intent. So I have a very high respect for that. I don't think, though, that... Well, I'll tell you why. Because when I was like 9 years old and I was being confirmed in the Catholic Church, confirmation, a young boy at 9 years old gets confirmed. And in the confirmation ceremony, the bishop was officiating, and after the ceremonies were over, he asked the children in the church, and it was a very big affair because my family was connected to the Vatican, so everybody was there to see my confirmation. And we were warned by the nuns and by the priests, if the bishop asks you, if you have any questions, if you ask any, you're going to get hurt. Just keep your mouth shut and sit and play dumb. Okay? So the bishop asked the children, do you have any questions? So I raised my hand. Nobody else did. I raised my hand and said, yeah, I got a question. And I said, my father works with torches. He's like a welder. Could I take a torch and burn a spirit, burn an angel? And he says, no. And I said, why not? Would it hurt him if I burned him? And he said, well, no. And I said, why not? He said, well, because you can't burn a spirit. Why not? And he said, well, because fire is a natural phenomenon. It has to have something like wood or paper or something to burn. You can't burn a spirit. And I said, well, then why am I worrying about going to hell if my spirit can't burn? Yeah. And the nuns standing on the side by the church said, you? Like here. So I grew up knowing that the system of theology is a way to control your actions. Blessed are the meek, for they're easy to control. The point being is that we need to understand that spirituality is a very powerful thing, and people need to get in tune with it. I have the highest of respect for the Christian theology, but it has been misrepresented far too far and needs to be redefined. Oh, the black robes. Well, as I said, black was a color associated with the planet Saturn. And Saturn, the Saturnalian influence, incidentally, the planet Saturn influences science, philosophy, politics, government. Saturn, one of the old symbols for, one of the old names for the planet Saturn was L. A long time ago, L was Saturn. And consequently, if your god Saturn has appointed you, you became one of the elect. And of course, the whole spiritual power of L, we today refer to as electricity. That common denominator that makes the juice operate. It's the juice that makes all things operate. Electricity. This is why money is referred to as currency. It's the juice that makes things work. It's a current. And incidentally, as much as I hate banking, I have to admit that the Federal Reserve and the IRS in America are necessary evils given the circumstances under which America exists. It, of course, would be better if neither one existed. But the whole idea is like the breath of Shiva. The breathing out, the breathing in. Everything breathes in and out, in and out. Therefore, the breathing out of the currency is from the Federal Reserve, which prints the money. It's paper that breathes out into society. Now it has to take a breath in, which is the IRS. It's got to be pulled back in, and then put out, and pull back in. Why? Because it's currency. It's a alternating current. The idea being, of course, is if you just keep putting money out, everything will become totally worthless in a couple of weeks, and the whole system comes falling down, because for the first time, everybody will finally understand it's just paper. So you've got to make it look important by taking it back from people. So it's a breathing in and breathing out. Again, it's just currency. I'm fascinated by the use of words and terms. As a matter of fact, when you go into a courtroom, you will see the judge sits on high. He sits up higher than you. That's so the law can look down on you, and you can look up to the law. And the judge is said to sit on the bench or rule from the bench. Look up the word bench. It's a Latin word for bank. So therefore the judge rules for the bank. This is why you cannot interrupt a church service or a courtroom procedure. You can be arrested for doing both. Why? Because the international maritime law says you cannot in any way interfere with the exchange of money. You're doing business here. A courtroom is a business. The judge rules from the bench or bank. So you're conducting business. Yes. Yes.
You speak that politicians, attorneys, very well the symbols, how to create the law, way to manipulate people. So do they have their own secret society with initiation? And you understand the mechanics?
Sure. Yeah, it's like the gang warfare in Los Angeles or any big city in America. They spray graffiti. Those symbols mean something only to those who are on the same level, only to those people who know how to read the symbols. And I've said for a long time that the words and terms and symbols that are used in our country and throughout the world are like letters of the alphabet. If you put them together, the symbols together, and know what they mean and what they imply, you're never going to figure out who's running what. But I mean, some of the most outrageously, overwhelmingly obvious stuff is occurring in America, and people don't even see it. I mean, you drive by an Arco and you see Arco sign in America, the Arco oil. It's on the angle. It's a square on the angle. But if you square the square, it becomes the Knights of Malta. He said, and this is an FBI agent. He said, when you speak harshly in public of government, a certain amount of that is allowable. You know, they don't mind. They're not offended. They're not going to affect anything. They're not going to believe anyway. And besides, what are they going to do if they did believe it? Right? And he said, but, and this was his words, and I remember him well, because I was really rather scared when he called, because I was not expecting to be talking to an FBI agent. He said, when you, and I take an oath that this was the words that he said, when you speak of the church, what you're talking about is organized crime at the highest level in our country. You're talking about money, political power. So, he says, so as long as he was in another large city in the state of California, I was in Los Angeles, and I got a phone call one day from a FBI man, from an FBI officer, and agent, and he said to me, he said, we have been watching and listening to you from day one. And and he says, but we have no problem with what you do at this point. You are not considered, and you are perceived to be an individual on a soapbox. No one is going to be concerned about you. No one is threatened. But if you begin to be heard, not listened to, but heard, and if that becomes the case that you are becoming known and being heard, then you will be dealt with accordingly. So I want you to try to remember how he said this. He said, at this point, you are not considered to be a threat to the authorities. But if that day comes, you will be dealt with accordingly. I said, yes, I understand that. And so he said to me, when you speak harshly of government and banking, which I do,